Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. In January, we've been looking at different aspects of working for yourself, be it freelancing or contracting. Today, we've got a really interesting perspective. We're going to be looking at what it's like to be a veteran, sort of a battle-scarred, battle-weary person who's been working for yourself for ages. I'm your host, Jessica Rose. I'm joined today by...
My name is Remy Sharp. I've been working for myself for 11 years and I work on the web and do lots of different things.
So all throughout January, we've been talking with different guests who work for themselves and have different kinds of advice. And I think a lot of our listeners, and maybe you, dear listener, are just looking at working for yourself for the first time. But you've been going at this for 11 years. What's that like?
It's fun, actually. I mean, I've been working professionally since 99, and it turns out that I quite like doing lots of different things. I really love the choice that my job offers me, as in I can work on a side project today, I can do client work tomorrow, I can schedule in my own holiday. I don't really have to answer to anyone, sort of. You go from a full-time job where you have a few bosses to freelance where you have hundreds of bosses, potential bosses. So it's not quite, you don't answer anyone, but I still think that I would want to be doing this for the next 10 years. It certainly has its challenges. And I think one of the biggest things I'm struggling with at the moment is actually kind of loneliness and just being on my own all the time. I'm very good at working on my own, but I have literally been working by myself for almost 12 months now, just completely isolated. So that's the one thing I'm kind of looking at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds like something that a lot of people, when they were looking at getting into contracting or looking at getting into freelancing or working for themselves in another capacity, that they might not think about, that it can be quite isolating. What kinds of things are you thinking might be a good fix for that?
One of the things I do already is I'm part of a co-working space. I only go in, I go in once a week. So I go in once every Friday. I make sure that I go to that co-working space. But I'm quite shy in the first place. If I don't know a person already, I'm not very forthcoming in just speaking to strangers, which is not the best quality to have, but I know that I'm certainly not alone in that. But that's the first thing, co-working spaces, be in a place where there are other people around you. And it does happen naturally. You just end up kind of seeing the same person in the kitchen. And I've kind of made acquaintances by doing that, just kind of getting coffee at a time and someone perks up and says, how was your weekend? Or what are you doing this weekend? I've started interacting with other human beings. I think that's the first kind of easy step. Certainly 5 years ago, the way that I worked was I actually went to a lot of coffee shops during the week. So I didn't have any co-working space to go to, but I would say, okay, I'm going to pack up my bag, put my laptop in my bag, head off into town and find a coffee shop that I can sit and work in, buy coffee from there. It's not super busy, it's not super loud. And I'm quite fortunate. I work in Brighton where there's a lot of quite welcoming coffee shops that like people sitting there and using their seats and offer you free Wi-Fi in exchange for your money for your coffee or money for your lunch. So they realize that you're going to bring your clients there potentially and you're going to bring other people there. And actually, I made friends by working in coffee shops. I made some good friends, like long-term friends out of that working situation. It's just now I've kind of fallen out of the habit. I have a young family and it's just been Christmas. So Christmas, I'm kind of staying home a lot more and it's trying to find my rhythm again and trying to be around other human beings again and reminding myself that it's not so bad to speak to someone. Coffee shops, meetups, finding that kind of weekly or monthly meetup I found helped me as well. And co-working spaces, anything that kind of offer you something to kind of dip your toe into. You may want to kind of start 5 days a week or I'm quite comfortable working at home. I can get a lot of work done. Whereas I know a lot of other friends who will work at home and all they want to do is either tidy up because it's in front of them or they get distracted by TV or that kind of thing. But I think the best thing to do is try and find a working environment where you can actually work and ideally be around other people. The co-working space I'm at, actually there's not a lot of people that do the same kind of work as me, but I'm starting to realize it's not that important. It's more important just to be around other human beings, just for that moment where you take a break and have a coffee and just talk to someone else and take your mind off of work for a second, in fact.
For your human contact needs.
Exactly.
So we're having a conversation really focused on what it's like to be a freelancer long-term and how you can be successful. But I think this is something people think about when they first start working for themselves. Like, hey, where am I going to work? How do I work best? I think your point that this is something you need to be looking at throughout your career while you work for yourself is really valuable.
Yeah. It's, I mean, like I said, I've been doing it for over 11 years and it ebbs and flows and you kind of create habits and you fall out of habits, or I've fallen out of habits. I had good habits and I've fallen out of them. Situations change. A few years ago, our youngest daughter was really struggling with sleep, didn't realize that actually it was really affecting me and my wife. And the working situation was fortunate where I could kind of take some time off and just be at home and me and my wife kind of recover and just support each other. But that knocked me out the habit of being around people and going to an office and having that. I mean, I was going to a co-working space more regularly. Like you said, it's something you think about when you start off, but it's something that, you're going to be ahead of the game if you're thinking about it regularly. If you're thinking about it at least every year, kind of, am I happy with what I'm doing? And do I have the right surroundings? And doing something about it as well. It's kind of obvious advice, and it's advice for me as well. This is not something that I practice perfectly. It's something I'm trying to, tell myself that I need to look at what I'm doing and make sure I make changes to be around people. And evening meetups, I very rarely go to them because I've got, like I said, I have a young family. I actually want to be back there for them and help putting the kids down to bed. But they're now a little bit older and I'm not connecting with my local community and I need to do something about that. And Julie, my wife, is even sending me messages today saying, oh, look, there's a web developer meetup. Maybe you should go. Like, she's quite aware that I spend a lot of time at home.
So that's really interesting. Like, you've got both the incredible benefit of this flexibility, but also it's easy to fall into patterns that you might not want to for long-term working.
Yeah, absolutely. When you work for yourself, I think the hardest thing is the motivation and constantly kind of telling yourself that, okay, I need to do this project, or I need to work on this thing, or I need to do this thing that I really don't want to do. I need to make this phone call that I just, I hate talking on the phone, or I always find I've got some item on my list that I've been avoiding for ages. And when I worked for a company and I had a boss, they would say to me, you need to do this for the end of the day. Whereas when I work for myself, I have to kind of muster up that motivation to do that thing. And that's ongoing. It will always be ahead of you and you always have to be doing it. But there are so many benefits that go with it, right? It's one of the challenges that goes with the benefit of saying, okay, I want to go on holiday in a month's time for 2 weeks and I'm going to do it because I don't have any work on, so I can just do it. You can't just wander off on holiday at a moment's notice when you work for a big company. It might be the project is dictating when you work or even what you work on. I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a side project because I can and I want to. The reason I love the position I'm in is that I can work on as many side projects as I want. The one that I'm doing right this minute today is I'm working on a complete refactor of JSBin. The upside is I get to use kind of new technology and throw away all the legacy code that's been going for almost a decade now. The downside is I'm literally rewriting solutions to things that I solved years ago. But yeah, JSBin is getting a complete refactor. And once I solve this last blocking issue, it'll be ready for kind of public to kind of start seeing it, start playing with it. But oh my gosh, I've got one of my plans today is to do a mind map of all the side projects I have rattling around my head, so that at least they're on paper and not in my head.
So now that we've gotten to talk about the fun stuff, getting to work on JSBin, a project which it sounds like you've really enjoyed, I'm going to step back a little bit and ask you about the hard stuff. So you touched on avoidance. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I not only struggle with a lot myself, but something I hear a lot of people talk about. Do you have any sort of ways to grapple with that? Or is this just something you battle with?
I definitely battle with it all the time. To be honest, something that works really well for me is writing down on paper.
Okay.
Literally writing down a list of the things that are kind of items to do, and not a markdown file. I know myself well enough that I want to write a markdown file. I want to do it on the computer. But as soon as I do it like that, it just doesn't seem to have the same effect. If I write the list of things that I need to do or I need to work on or look at, consider on a piece of paper, that first step always kind of relieves a little bit of pressure in me personally.
So that's really interesting, because I think a lot of times when we have something we're avoiding, taking that first step can feel so challenging but then weirdly freeing?
And so one technique I learned really early on in my career is to look at the list and say, okay, I'm only going to get one thing done today, just one. I will not judge myself for how big that is or how small that is. And what is the one thing I will do today? And I'll put a star next to it and do that first. Now, I don't always follow that process, but I know that is the most effective way for me to get a thing done. And that can range from writing a proposal for a conference to just going to meetups, like meeting people.
Oh, that's very tempting to avoid.
Telling myself that I will do that thing.
I'll go next week. You know what? February is going to be better.
Yeah, or something came up. But I've literally had meetups I was supposed to go to where I was being offered free food and free drink. And conveniently at 6, something came up that I needed to focus on instead. I think we're our own worst enemy at times. But that list thing, that really works for me. Like piece of paper, it just seems to have, I don't know, it's more visceral than a laptop for some reason. I don't know.
You can't just avoid that file.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I can write a markdown file and be like, oh, my editor preferences are kind of slightly off. How do I make the markdown slightly, it's a rabbit hole, right?
And update this other stuff. And now that I look at it, this thing on my website's out of date. Like there's a lot of yak shaving you can do in personal admin as well.
Yeah. And a piece of paper just doesn't, it's just a list. And when I write it down, it kind of makes me realize that sometimes there's things that I think are important and aren't important at all. I bought a domain a couple of years ago and I told myself that I would release the domain if I didn't do the project. And it's burning in my head. But when I write it down against all the other list of things that I need to do, it's not a priority at all. And it shouldn't even be in my head. It's just like, okay, if I pay for the domain again in a year's time, more for me, but it's really not something I should be contributing to my own kind of daily stress.
So one thing I've been really interested in recently is the concept of cognitive load. Have you heard of this at all?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the concept that every sort of working process you have, everything you have to do, everything on your mind, every worry, eats up a little bit more of your available memory, kind of like having too many browser tabs open.
Yeah, I think I bought the book Getting Stuff Done.
Oh, tell me that you haven't managed to read it yet. That would be delightful.
Yeah, no, I haven't. That's the best part. I read maybe the first 8 pages, to which I was like, oh, okay, I get this. If you can read the first 8 pages or first chapter without buying the book, like borrow it off someone, it's worthwhile because it does talk about cognitive load. It talks about the way your brain is working by constantly looping these things in your head. And I visualize things in a kind of programmatic way, or like computers.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of visualizing my brain kind of on a loop. And if it needs to do another loop, then it's burning CPU in my brain. And so it then talks about writing it down. And as soon as the action of writing that thing down that's in your head, your brain kind of releases it. It's like, it releases that socket to that thing that is on a loop. It's now on a piece of paper and you don't have to worry about it. It is still there, but it's removed from that initial cognitive load. But that's literally the only trick I have. I suspect that reading that whole book might get me a lot further. Things I try to actively do actually is close the tab on my email. God knows what will happen if I do that, but close the tab on my email and close Twitter. I find, Twitter is a sinkhole, and it's not a fun one these days. There's so much kind of sadness out there that I feel like I need to digest that every few hours rather than a constant stream.
The shouting to kitten pick ratio has really fallen out of whack.
Yeah. I find that closing those things really does make a big difference. It's so tempting to stay connected, and particularly as I'm working my own, this is something I've been thinking about, is if I'm not around people, Twitter is literally my direct network, my peers at the moment, and this is how I surround myself with people. I'm not on Facebook, I don't have real people around me, so I use Twitter as that way of kind of staying connected to people. But if I'm telling myself I want to kind of close it, then what will happen?
Something cool might happen when you're gone.
Nothing happens, literally. It's mostly a barrage of terrible things, mostly, originating from Trump.
Oh, the UK is nice and exciting these days too.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, actually...
everything is terrible.
Yeah, everything is terrible. And I only need to catch up on that every couple of hours. So if I stay in my editor I mean, there's tools that you can get that help you track whether or not you're being effective at staying focused. But I feel like it's kind of a bit of an oxymoron to have a tool that tracks if you're focused, then you look at the tool to see if you're focused.
It's one more thing to add to your cognitive load. One thing I've had mixed success with myself is having a different profile on my laptop where my email's not logged in, my social media accounts aren't logged in. It's just things I can Google for work and any distractions I can find on the web.
Does that work?
It works about as well as my willpower.
Yeah. Because I find I've just kind of like, my phone is here. I could just look.
Have you been watching me work? Because a little bit like that. Yeah. That works about as well as promising yourself that you're going to turn off all screens at 10 p.m. and read. Like,
yeah.
It would work if I was a different person in a different time.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about sort of needing to connect and reconnect to people as part of working by yourself long term. And that scary avoidance stuff never really goes away, that you just find different ways to cope with it. What other challenges did you maybe not see when you first started out freelancing, but now that you've been doing this for ages, you're like, wow, this is something that keeps coming up?
So one of the biggest things when I was thinking about freelancing was money. And I think it's I'm pretty sure it's a universal concern that you go from a full-time job or any kind of job where when the money's coming in or how much is coming in. I certainly thought, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to afford to pay the bills, or where on earth is this money going to come from? And actually having, like I said, I'm 11 years in, but pretty much from the get-go, it wasn't particularly a problem. One of the biggest differences is basically when I was working for a company, the way that I would gauge whether or not I'm earning enough money was against everyone else. And if I'm a developer, then the manager is earning more than me, and their manager is earning more than me, and the CEO is earning more than them, probably. If there's a developer that's got 10 years experience and another one who has 5, then they're probably earning different amounts of money. And as you work for longer or you have more experience, you earn more money. But once I moved to working for myself, there's no one else to compare to. And it literally boils down to how much money do I need to be able to pay my bills?
Interesting. I hear a lot of people say, how much can I get?
Well, I draw a difference between my business income and my personal income.
Okay.
And my business takes as much as it can get, really. I want it to earn as much as it can, but I will earn from my business what I need. And I'll leave money on the table in my business bank that I don't need, because it's not going to do anything in my personal bank account except for be frivolously spent. And I'm not the kind of person who'll just randomly buy just stuff, I guess. My business will buy a new laptop or a new phone because that's a business expense. I have like notepads and pens and a lot of the stuff that kind of I need to work with. It's a business expense. My personal income, I need to cover my bills. I pay into a little bit of savings, and there's just a little bit of money there for kind of spending money, but it's really not a lot. I mean, I'm a grown adult with kids. I mean, my money goes on to just random stuff, like baby wipes. We've got a lot of baby wipes.
Okay.
But that's part of the bills.
As a grown adult who doesn't have kids, I thought there were a lot more plastic dinosaurs way up there in the expenses column.
Well, but that can be part of your budget. That's the thing. Like, you can have a plastic dinosaur budget, I think. I mean, so really the point of leaving the money in a business bank account is that for the months that are inevitably dry, or, December, when you want to take the whole month off and just chill out over Christmas, your business doesn't have to bring in more money to be able to keep paying you the same amount. It's literally, it's a buffer. It's a literal buffer that the money comes into the business and it will drip feed you the amount of money that you need. And if your personal situation changes, i.e. you want to buy a house, your rent goes up or your mortgage goes up or it goes down, you can make that adjustment. That's how I live, basically. Because of that, I've always kind of erred on a side of less risky, and it means that the business bank account has a buffer in it, and I can take personal risks where I can work on a side project for a month. And because I work for myself, if I'm working on a side project, it literally means my business is making no money. But I'm able to do that because I'm not drawing everything out of the business in the first place. Your money was always this kind of imaginary concern, and really it makes no difference, because if you have a full-time job, it's, you can lose your job at any point. And hopefully not down to incompetency, but the company can change situation. They may downsize. It's not a guaranteed income the same way as it isn't for a freelancer or an independent.
So one thing I'm really interested in is you've been talking a lot about the experience of having been working for yourself for 11 years. That's a really long time. What's been sort of the biggest difference between you when you first started and you as a working for yourself veteran?
Yeah, veteran. So definitely when I started out, I wasn't confident about where I get my work from. Compared to today, I don't really pitch for work, which is kind of interesting compared to my peers.
Where does the work come from then? Like, if you're not pitching, is it just magic?
Yeah, well, I've always had this kind of thing of landing on my feet. But the reality is, Julie, my wife, actually gave me a bit of a reality check on this. I've said this before, and she said, like, you may not pitch for work, but I'm blogging and publishing code and speaking and just generally connecting with my surrounding community, which in itself is actually just a big advert, hopefully, to show that I'm capable of doing, X. Hopefully people know me for being able to write JavaScript. Certainly a decade ago, I had a blog called jQuery for Designers, and people would know me for jQuery, and I would get work. When the work started coming in by itself, it would be for jQuery work, and I'd be like, oh, cool, I'm, known for jQuery work. But it's because there was a reasonably successful blog jQuery for Designers was a screencast blog. I would take existing cool effects on some website, and I would basically break down how I thought it worked and how I would solve it using jQuery. To today's React, Vue, etc. world, it's not very interesting, but back then it was still pretty new and it seemed to be enjoyed. But one of the things I did do right at the beginning when I was just starting out is I list out every single person I know and what they do and how I can provide some business to them.
Okay.
And the list it was a little bit sad in that the list is long. I mean, I was literally listing friends' parents at some point, and a number of items where I was like, okay, I could provide them this kind of business. It was 3 or 4. But out of those 3 or 4, 2 of them came back and said, yeah, okay, I'd like you to build my website.
Okay.
That's how I got started. It was literally my very first 2 clients were people I knew. I wasn't doing work for a friend, which I have a whole thing about. Like I'm really against doing work for friends. I think it's riddled with traps and it's just generally a bad idea. But the piece of paid work, the first piece of paid work was a friend, his business, the business he worked for. They needed a website. So, that wasn't me working for him. It was me working for that company. But it was because I knew they had a business, they had a website. And I said, I can update this for you and I can put together a CMS thing that you can manage. And, that was the first piece of work. And then I used that same code for a tangent friend's parent who ran a dance company. And, that was basically my first outreach. But the work from then on and up to today has been through word of mouth, but it's because I publish content. And that's what works for me. Like that is not a guaranteed success to get business, but it's what works for me to some degree. Like I don't spend 365 days a year with client work. In truth, it's more like 2 or 3 months is doing client work, and the other 9 months is spread across the year is working on stuff and putting stuff out on the web or running my conference. So I run a conference as well, which actually draws in some of my business income.
Which conference is that?
Yeah, so FFConf is my conference. So that runs in November. It's actually 10 years old this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. It's I love the conference. I love what we are able to do with it. But that brings in money. I think actually, so one of the, just looking at the differences over the decade, I have multiple income streams at the moment. My business's money comes from different places, whereas obviously at the beginning of that, I didn't have that set up in the first place. And today, so the conference is probably about a third or a quarter of our income. And then I have a few little products here and there that kind of bring in income. Like I did a video training course that brought in some money, client work, I run training as well. that's something that's evolved over time. Like I've gotten involved in more and more things.
It sounds a little bit like when you first started out that you were in a sales phase. You're like, hey, I can do stuff. Hire you there, hire me to do stuff. And then it's kind of moved from sales to overall marketing. I don't want to say personal brand, but if we could think of a word that's a bit less maligned to mean personal brand, you've sort of said, hi, I'm me. Here's the stuff I do. Look at it. I guess you can hire me if you want.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't do a good job of that in the first place. Like, even my peers and friends don't know that I am available for hire or what I particularly do. I did some work for Brad Frost last year, and his email to me was, "Do you do this kind of stuff?" Like, yeah, this is exactly what I do. It surprises me that people still don't realize, but that's my fault. That's not anyone else's fault. I think you're right. I think the word is marketing, as much as that makes me cringe, but it is that. Like, that's what I do to kind of bring business my way. I blog and I put open source material out there. And
if you were going to give some advice to someone who wants to get into freelancing, they want to work for themselves, they want to make it 10 years, 11, they want to go for the long haul. Aside from let people know what they can pay you for, what kind of advice would you leave them with?
The advice I would give is do something that you enjoy doing. And that doesn't mean you have to absolutely love it, I think. And there will be pieces of work that aren't fun, but don't lock yourself into a decade worth of doing WordPress plugins. That's what you're good at, but you can't stand doing it because that's no fun. Like, that's just, the prospect of that is quite sad. So try and find something you enjoy doing, and keep asking yourself if you enjoy doing it. Try and ask yourself regularly if you enjoy doing it, enjoy what you're doing, and whether you actually want to go and work for a company for a break from freelancing. I think that's a valid question.
This is really sound advice. Go out there, think about what you want to do, talk to other people, try and avoid avoidance. But also, you can take a break from freelancing and go work in an office when you need some human contact or a regular paycheck.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think is, I've always struggled with that idea. Like, the idea of going from working for myself to working for another company, to me in my head feels like some kind of failure, but it's not at all. It's, in reality, it's either taking a break from what you do, or it's not a failure at all. Like, if you're really good at creative design, but you need the work to be given to you, that's not failure. When you're freelance and when you work for yourself, you have to do all of these things, and doing marketing and trying to bring a brand together. I've got a whole bunch of products online, and very few of them have my company logo on there. And even if they do, I'm certain that most people don't know what my company is called. And that's not a bad thing, as long as they know me, because it's me and Julie in my company, my wife. I do the development in the company, and that's it. So the other thing I'd say is, if you can somehow keep yourself present amongst the audience that you want to do work for, and for me, that is blogging. I think blogging is a really, really valuable tool. It helps me kind of flesh out ideas, and I've literally learned how to construct sentences, the written sentences. I've learned how to communicate. My spelling was atrocious before, and I don't particularly need spell check these days. I can write pretty well because I've been blogging for a long time. And there's a lot of value to that. Like, a lot of, I wouldn't worry so much at first about kind of getting views and getting hits and being the viral post, because that kind of, when that does happen, it's kind of few and far between. And it's, in my experience, it's always the blog post that you never expect, or I've never expected to kind of get a lot of success. But that consistently putting out content is something that's consistently let people know that I'm still out there, and in some cases let them know that I'm available for hire, or at the very least let them know that I can do this thing. Like, if you want a JavaScript thing, I can do that, because look, I have this catalog of blog posts that shows that I can do that, or discuss it. And I think that's valuable. I really do think it's valuable, and I really do think people worry about kind of, I've got nothing to contribute. Everyone has something to say, because everyone has their own unique perspective, I guarantee you.
Fantastic advice. Don't forget to tell people they can pay you. Don't forget to tell them what you do.
Yeah.
And be writing about or talking about what your strengths are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you, dear listener, for joining us. Come back next week. All throughout February, we're going to be looking at different aspects of learning to code. It sounds like it's going to be really newbie friendly, and we hope it is. But we've got a lot of really valuable things we think are going to be great for, again, veteran programmers. Thank you so much for your time.